Most seniors believe clutter only lives in their closets or basements. But the truth is, the most draining clutter hides in places you'd never expect. Think about it. Have you ever walked into your home, looked around, and thought everything looked neat, but still felt an invisible weight pressing on you? That heaviness isn't in the obvious places. It's tucked into corners, hidden behind habits, and buried in spaces you haven't questioned in years. For Nerissa, a 70-year-old from Arizona, this realization came when she started asking herself why her house always looked tidy but never felt peaceful. She discovered that clutter isn't just about boxes, old clothes, or dusty shelves. It's about what silently drains your energy, steals your calm, and even chips away at your independence after 60. And once she uncovered these forgotten clutter spots, her entire home began to change. The light felt different, her mornings felt calmer, and for the first time in years, she described her house as a place that finally gave back instead of taking away. Over the next few minutes, you'll see exactly what she found, and why these overlooked spaces matter far more than the closets or basements everyone talks about. If you want the same freedom, subscribe now to Wise Aging Seniors, because your next chapter deserves clarity. Meet Nerissa Cole, a 70-year-old from the sun-baked suburbs of Arizona. On the surface, Nerissa's life seemed steady and well-kept. After losing her husband just a few years ago, she had poured her energy into keeping her surroundings neat. No one could walk into her home and accuse her of living in clutter. Her closets closed easily. Her counters were mostly clear. Friends who visited for coffee would often comment, "Nerissa, your house is always so tidy. I wish mine looked like this." From the outside, it looked like she had it all together. But Nerissa carried a secret most people couldn't see. Behind her polite smile was a question that kept circling in her mind whenever she sat alone in her living room. Why does my home look neat but still feel so heavy? She couldn't put her finger on it. She didn't have the piles or hoards you see on TV. She wasn't tripping over boxes or buried under stacks of newspapers. But when she walked through her house, she felt the weight of something invisible pressing down on her spirit. This invisible heaviness isn't unique to Nerissa. It's something many seniors over 60 quietly wrestle with in the United States, often without realizing it. We're told for decades that clutter is about the stuff you see, the garage, the attic, the overflowing drawers. But Nerissa's story reveals something more unsettling. Clutter doesn't have to be visible to be exhausting. Sometimes it hides in places you would never think to check, places you may have walked past 1,000 times without questioning. For Nerissa, uncovering these forgotten spots wasn't just about tidying up, it was about reclaiming peace of mind, safety, and even a sense of identity. Each discovery forced her to confront not just what was taking up space in her house, but what was lingering in her heart. Some of these clutter spots were tied to guilt, others to memories she wasn't ready to face, and still others were subtle changes in her environment that had gone unnoticed for years. This journey is more than a checklist. It's a reminder that after 60, our homes should not be silent weight-bearers, they should be sanctuaries. And when Nerissa began peeling back the layers of hidden clutter, she realized she wasn't just making room in her house. She was making room in her life. What she discovered will likely surprise you, because these aren't the typical clutter traps you hear about. They're the kinds of places most seniors never even think to examine, yet they quietly drain energy and joy day after day. Her story will walk us through 7 of these forgotten clutter spots. Some may shock you. Some may feel uncomfortably familiar. But each one carries a lesson about what it really means to live lighter, freer, and more peacefully after 60. And as you listen, you may find yourself asking the same question Nerissa once did, and realizing the answer lies in corners of your life you've overlooked for far too long. Spots 1. The clutter of unspoken promises. When Nerissa finally opened the bottom drawer of an old cedar chest, she found something she had pushed aside for years, a dusty box filled with half-done photo albums. Pages where photos had been carefully glued in place sat beside stacks of loose prints from decades past. Birthdays, graduations, vacations at the Grand Canyon, and even baby pictures of her children, now parents themselves. She had once promised them that someday she would finish the albums, that she would create keepsakes they could treasure forever. But someday never came. Life got busy, then difficult, and after her husband passed away, the thought of sorting through those photos felt overwhelming. For Nerissa, the albums weren't just paper and pictures. They had become heavy reminders of a silent promise left unfinished. Every time she stumbled across that box, she felt a pang of guilt. I said I'd do this for them, and I never did. And this is where the clutter of unspoken promises becomes so draining for seniors over 60. It's not the physical weight of the objects that hurts, it's the emotional weight of what they represent. So many older adults in the United States are carrying similar someday clutter. It might not be photo albums. For some, it's fabric for a quilt that was never started. For others, it's recipes clipped from magazines with plans to cook them for family dinners that never happened. For a grandfather in Michigan, it was a garage shelf of wood pieces he always meant to carve into toys. These unfinished projects sit quietly in drawers, boxes, or closets, but they speak loudly in the heart. They whisper about things you meant to do, roles you meant to fill, and legacies you meant to leave behind. The danger is subtle but powerful. Every time you pass by them, you feel a small sting of guilt. Over time, those stings pile up like emotional clutter, making your home feel heavy even when it looks neat. Nerissa realized that what weighed her down wasn't the space those albums took up, it was the constant reminder of what she hadn't done. But here's the shift that set her free. She understood that keeping those half-finished albums didn't honor her children, it only kept her stuck. So instead of carrying the guilt, she chose a new approach. She picked out a handful of her favorite photos, ones that truly told her family's story, and placed them in a single frame on her mantle. She boxed up the rest and gently released them, giving herself permission to let go of promises she could no longer keep. This choice didn't erase her role as a loving mother or grandmother. In fact, it reminded her children that memories don't live in albums, they live in shared stories, in laughter around the table, in phone calls and visits. By releasing the unfinished project, Nerissa reclaimed her peace. For seniors everywhere, the message is clear: unfinished promises are clutter, too. They may not take much room on a shelf, but they can take enormous space in your heart. Letting them go doesn't mean you've failed, it means you've chosen freedom over guilt, presence over pressure, and joy over heaviness. And sometimes, that's the greatest gift you can give both yourself and the people you love. Spots 2. The energy sink corners. Nerissa's living room looked spotless to anyone visiting for the first time. The surfaces gleamed, the carpet was free of dust, and not a single pile of magazines or cluttered boxes sat in sight. Yet anyone who lingered there for more than a few minutes could feel something wasn't quite right. The air felt heavy, the space seemed closed in, and despite Arizona's nearly constant sunshine outside, the inside of her home carried a muted grayness. For years, she had grown so accustomed to this atmosphere that she no longer noticed it. The room was arranged exactly as it had been since the 1980s, when she and her husband had first set it up. Thick velvet drapes sealed the windows shut, and a bulky sofa sat squarely in front of the largest source of natural light. This setup, which once felt cozy and proper, had turned into an invisible form of clutter. Not the kind that stacks up in boxes or crowds a closet, but the kind that quietly steals life from a room. What Nerissa came to understand is that clutter isn't only about things you hold on to. Sometimes clutter is the absence of what you need most, and in her case, it was the absence of light. The day she finally pulled those curtains back and shifted her furniture was the day her home seemed to exhale. Golden sunlight streamed across the floor, dancing on surfaces that hadn't felt daylight in decades. The space immediately appeared larger and brighter, and Nerissa felt something even more surprising: her mood shifted. She later explained that the difference was almost physical, as if a hidden weight had been lifted from her chest. For seniors over 60, this lesson is especially vital. As we age, our bodies and minds depend more than ever on natural light. Exposure to sunlight helps regulate our sleep cycles, boosts serotonin levels for better mood, and supports bone health through vitamin D. Yet many seniors unknowingly live in dim, overshaded homes simply because furniture was placed a certain way decades ago and never moved. Heavy curtains, oversized recliners blocking windows, or dark wall hangings can all create energy sink corners, spaces that drain life instead of giving it back. Nerissa realized that her house wasn't suffocating because of stuff. It was suffocating because it had stopped breathing with her. The clutter wasn't measured in objects but in the way her environment cut her off from light and renewal. Once she made the simple shift, removing the heavy drapes, rearranging her sofa, and choosing lighter fabrics, her home felt alive again. She discovered that sometimes the most powerful form of decluttering is not about removing things, but about allowing energy, air, and brightness to return to your daily life. If you've ever sat in a room that felt tidy but strangely heavy, take a closer look at your corners, your windows, and the way your furniture is arranged. Ask yourself, is this space feeding me energy, or quietly draining it away? For many seniors, the smallest changes, opening blinds, clearing a path for sunlight, or rearranging just one piece of furniture, can have an impact far greater than emptying a closet. Like Nerissa, you may find that the clutter you need to clear isn't a pile of possessions at all. It's the hidden barriers standing between you and the light that makes your home and your life feel truly alive. Spot 3. The stalled corners. Nerissa's den looked neat to anyone who walked in, but in the far corner sat a recliner that told a different story. It hadn't been moved in years, positioned exactly where her husband had placed it before he passed. The chair wasn't broken, it wasn't messy, but it carried a weight heavier than any pile of boxes. It was a frozen space, a quiet reminder that part of her home, and part of her, had stopped moving forward. She didn't sit in it, didn't rearrange around it, and didn't dare replace it. That corner had become a shrine to what was, leaving no room for what could be. This is what I call a stalled corner. Unlike obvious clutter, these spaces don't shout for attention. Instead, they whisper reminders of seasons that have ended, of people who are gone, or of roles you no longer live. They're easy to overlook because they appear orderly, yet they quietly drain energy. A room that hasn't changed in decades begins to feel less like a home and more like a museum, where life is preserved but not lived. For Nerissa, the recliner was that museum piece. Each time she passed it, she felt a pause, an unspoken heaviness that kept her tied to the past. And she's not alone. Many seniors keep rooms or corners stalled in time. A child's bedroom left untouched long after the kids have built lives of their own. A sewing machine still set up though it hasn't been used in years. A dining room frozen as if a dinner party might start any second, even though those gatherings ended long ago. These spaces aren't clutter in the usual sense, but they become emotional clutter, reminding you daily of what's no longer part of your present life. The turning point for Nerissa came when she realized that holding onto the recliner wasn't keeping her husband's memory alive, it was keeping her from creating new memories of her own. With care, she gave the chair to her grandson, who wanted a piece of his grandfather close to him. And in that same corner, she placed a small writing desk by the window. For the first time in years, she sat there in the mornings, journaling and watching the sun rise. The corner that once held silence and grief now held purpose and light. The lesson is that stalled corners aren't about furniture or objects. They're about spaces we've unconsciously allowed to stand still. Letting them evolve doesn't erase the past, it honors it by creating space for the present. For seniors, the question becomes, where in my home has time stood still, and what would it mean to bring that space back to life? Because when you free a stalled corner, you don't just reclaim a piece of your house, you reclaim a piece of yourself. Spot 4. The hidden noise clutter. The living room sounded busy even when no one was there. Nerissa had gotten into the habit of leaving her television on from morning until night. At first, she told herself it was for company, a way to keep the house from feeling too empty after her husband passed. The voices of news anchors, commercials, and sitcom laugh tracks filled the air, creating the illusion that life was bustling around her. But after years of this routine, she realized something unsettling. She rarely experienced true quiet anymore. Her home was never still, and neither was she. This is what I call hidden noise clutter. It doesn't pile up on shelves or in closets, but it has the same suffocating effect. Constant sound, TVs left running, radios humming in the background, buzzing appliances, even overly loud clocks, becomes a layer of clutter that weighs on the nervous system. Seniors often keep these sounds going because silence feels foreign, even intimidating. But over time, that noise keeps the mind from resting and the body from truly relaxing. Nerissa didn't recognize how much it was affecting her until one afternoon when the power went out during a storm. For the first time in years, her house was completely quiet. At first, she panicked. The silence felt sharp, almost uncomfortable. But then, after a few minutes, something surprising happened. She noticed the soft rhythm of her own breathing. She heard the wind brushing against the windows, the creak of the house settling, even the sound of her cat's paws padding across the floor. Instead of loneliness, she began to feel calm. For the first time in a long time, her home felt like a place of peace instead of a constant echo of noise. For seniors across the United States, hidden noise clutter is more common than we think. Many leave a television or radio on to make the home feel alive, not realizing that too much background noise actually increases feelings of restlessness and unease. Studies have even shown that constant sound exposure can raise stress levels, interfere with memory, and make restful sleep more difficult. Nerissa's breakthrough came the day she turned her television off and left it off. At first, the silence felt strange, but soon she began to crave it. She filled the quiet with intentional sounds, soft music she actually enjoyed, phone calls with her children, and the laughter of her grandchildren when they visited. Noise became a choice, not a constant. And in that choice, she found freedom. The lesson here is simple but powerful. Clutter isn't always visible. Sometimes it's woven into the hum of your daily life. Ask yourself, what noises in my home are serving me, and what noises are simply filling space? Turning off a background TV, silencing an unused radio, or unplugging a buzzing appliance may feel small, but the relief can be immediate. Silence, far from being empty, can become a source of comfort and strength. For Nerissa, it was the reminder that peace isn't something you buy or find in noise, it's something you create when you give yourself permission to live in stillness. Spot 5. The Pathway Thieves. At first glance, Nerissa's hallway looked charming. She had placed a narrow table against the wall to hold family photos, a small basket for odds and ends, and even a potted plant she thought brightened the space. None of it looked like clutter. In fact, visitors often complimented her on how warm and decorated her home felt. But one morning, as she carried laundry from the dryer to her bedroom, her hip brushed the edge of the table. The basket slid, the stack of papers inside tumbled out, and for a split second she lost her balance. She caught herself, but the scare lingered. That was the moment Nerissa realized the danger wasn't in piles of junk on the floor, it was in the way she had unknowingly narrowed her own freedom to move. This is what I call the pathway thieves. They're the tables, baskets, chairs, or decorative pieces that slowly creep into the walking space of your home. They don't seem like clutter because they're in place, but they steal something far more valuable than square footage. They steal safe passage. For seniors, especially after 60, clear pathways aren't a luxury, they're independence. When the spaces you walk every day are crowded, even slightly, you increase your risk of stumbling. And one fall can change everything. Nerissa admitted she had never questioned these items. She had lived with them for decades, and they had become part of the scenery. But once she noticed how many corners were a little too tight, how many steps required sidestepping furniture, she realized her home wasn't serving her anymore, it was silently working against her. The clutter wasn't in piles on the floor, it was in the unnecessary things that slowly made her feel less secure in her own space. So she made a choice that at first felt strange but soon brought relief. She moved the hallway table into her guest room, relocated the plant to the patio where it thrived even more, and let go of the basket entirely. The change was immediate. Her hallway looked wider, brighter, easier to navigate. She described it as if her house had given her permission to walk freely again. For seniors across the United States, this lesson is urgent. Falls are one of the leading causes of loss of independence after 60, and yet most people think the risk comes only from loose rugs or stray shoes. In truth, the subtler danger is clutter that steals pathways. The cozy furniture arrangement that once made sense can, over time, create a maze. The little extras that once added charm can now add risk. Clearing pathway thieves isn't about stripping your home of personality. It's about protecting your freedom to move without fear. It's about making sure every step you take in your home supports your independence instead of threatening it. Nerissa discovered that once her pathways were clear, she not only felt safer, she felt more confident, less anxious, and even more willing to invite her grandchildren over to play, knowing the house was open and safe for them too. The real clutter here isn't the furniture itself. It's the idea that keeping every item where it has always been is harmless. For seniors, the bravest act of decluttering may not be emptying closets or garages, it may be reclaiming the simple, powerful gift of walking freely through your own home. Spot 6. The relational clutter. Buried in the back of a closet, Nerissa came across a worn showbox tied shut with twine. Inside were letters she had kept from her cousin, a woman she hadn't spoken to in more than 30 years. The handwriting was familiar, the words once affectionate, but the relationship had ended badly. Old disagreements and betrayals had built a wall between them, and every time Nerissa saw that box, it reopened the wound. It was as if the letters kept the argument alive, even though the cousin was no longer part of her life. This is what I call relational clutter. Unlike stacks of magazines or extra furniture, this clutter doesn't take up much space. It can fit in a single box, drawer, or folder. But its emotional weight can be crushing. Relational clutter is made up of objects tied to people who are no longer part of your life in a healthy way, friends who drifted, family members who caused pain, or relationships that ended in silence. Keeping these items feels harmless, but in reality, they're like emotional landmines scattered throughout the home. Every time you stumble on them, you're forced to relive something you thought you had put behind you. Nerissa realized that those letters weren't just paper. They were a tether to unresolved pain. Instead of giving her comfort, they filled her with bitterness, regret, and sadness. And here's the truth many seniors over 60 rarely hear: not all memories deserve a permanent seat in your home. Just because something is old doesn't mean it's sacred. Some pieces of the past don't need to be honored, they need to be released. For many older adults, relational clutter shows up in subtle ways. It might be photos of an ex-spouse tucked into albums, gifts from friends who betrayed your trust, or souvenirs from relationships that ended badly. On the surface, they look like keepsakes, but what they really do is keep emotional wounds fresh. Over time, these items rob you of peace in your own home. The day Nerissa finally untied the twine and went through the letters, she made a choice. Instead of rereading every word and reopening every hurt, she paused, said a quiet goodbye, and let the box go. It wasn't about erasing her past, it was about refusing to let her past dictate her present. Afterward, she described a sense of relief she hadn't expected. She felt lighter, as if her home had been holding its breath and finally exhaled. The lesson is simple but deeply freeing. Letting go of relational clutter isn't cruel, and it isn't denial. It's an act of self-respect. By clearing out objects tied to broken bonds, you reclaim your home as a place of peace rather than a museum of unresolved emotions. Ask yourself, what am I holding on to that still stings when I see it? If an object brings more pain than joy, more bitterness than love, it's not a keepsake, it's clutter. And clearing it isn't just about your shelves or drawers. It's about healing, moving forward, and creating a home that reflects the relationships that truly nourish you today. That's what Nerissa discovered when she let go of the letters. Her house didn't just gain more space, it gained more peace. Spot 7. The expired comfort zone. In the back of her linen closet, Nerissa kept a stack of old blankets folded neatly. On top was the heavy quilt her mother had given her as a wedding gift decades ago. Beneath it were other comfort pieces collected over the years, pillows with flattened stuffing, slippers worn soft at the heels, and throws that had lost their warmth. To her, these things felt untouchable because they represented comfort, tradition, and love. But one night, as she pulled the quilt over her shoulders, she noticed something troubling. Instead of warmth, it left her restless and itchy. The fabric carried a faint musty smell, and the weight of it made her feel trapped instead of comforted. That was the moment she realized what she had been holding on to wasn't comfort anymore. It was clutter disguised as care. This is the expired comfort zone, the items we associate with coziness or safety that, over time, stop serving us. For seniors, these objects often slip under the radar because they don't look like clutter. A quilt, pillow, or pair of slippers doesn't scream mess. Instead, it whispers nostalgia. But the truth is, when textiles grow old, they can carry dust, allergens, or simply stop providing the comfort they once did. The emotional tie keeps them in place, but the practical reality is that they weigh you down. Nerissa struggled with the decision to let go. That quilt wasn't just fabric, it was a memory of her mother, of her marriage, of a time when life felt whole. But when she admitted to herself that using it made her feel worse, not better, she began to see the difference between honoring the past and living in it. By keeping the quilt folded away out of guilt, she wasn't preserving her mother's love. She was preserving a burden that made her nights less restful and her home feel heavier. So, she made a choice. Nerissa kept one square of fabric from the quilt and framed it in a shadow box, turning it into a visible, joyful reminder instead of a hidden weight. She donated the rest, along with the pillows and throws she no longer used. Then she treated herself to a new, lightweight blanket that truly gave her the comfort she needed now. The first night she slept under it, she described waking up not just rested but free. For seniors across the United States, this lesson is vital. Comfort changes with time. What once soothed you may no longer fit your body, your health, or your life. Holding on to these expired comforts doesn't keep love alive, it only keeps you tethered to fatigue. The courage to release them doesn't erase your history. It allows you to create new comfort that supports who you are today. Ask yourself, am I keeping this because it comforts me now, or because it once did? If the answer leans toward the past, it may be time to let go. Because true comfort isn't in objects that once mattered, it's in surrounding yourself with what nourishes you here, in this season of life. That's what Nerissa discovered when she cleared her expired comfort zone. She didn't lose love. She gained peace, rest, and the freedom to live fully in the present. Nerissa's home didn't transform in a single day. There was no dramatic before and after moment like the kind you see on television. Instead, the change unfolded slowly, one hidden spot at a time. At first, the difference felt almost invisible, like a soft breath of relief she couldn't fully explain. But as she kept going, something deeper began to shift. Her house no longer felt like a museum of old promises or heavy memories. It began to feel like a place she could breathe in again. Every small change carried ripples. Opening the curtains in her living room didn't just bring in light, it brought her back to mornings where she felt energized instead of weighed down. Clearing her stalled corners gave her permission to reimagine spaces that had been frozen in time, turning reminders of grief into invitations for renewal. Even letting go of her expired comfort zone lifted a weight she hadn't noticed until it was gone. Her sleep deepened. Her mornings started without the same heaviness. The quiet in her home became soothing rather than unsettling. The truth she discovered is one most seniors rarely hear. Clutter isn't always what you see. Sometimes the real clutter is what you feel, that lingering sense of guilt when you pass an unfinished project, that subtle drain from a room too dark, or that restlessness caused by constant background noise. It's not just piles of things that steal peace, it's the way your environment holds you in patterns that no longer serve you. Nerissa's story proves that clearing hidden clutter isn't about stripping life down to emptiness. It's about creating space for the life you actually want now. At 70, she didn't need a house that carried every past version of herself. She needed a house that carried her forward. And that's what she created, step by step, corner by corner, until her home finally gave back more than it took. So ask yourself, which of these hidden clutter spots is quietly living in your own home? You may not notice it until you really look, but once you clear it, the difference is undeniable. Your house feels lighter. Your days feel calmer. And your nights give you the rest you've been missing. Which of these hidden clutter spots surprised you the most? Tell me in the comments, I read every one. And if this gave you a fresh way to see your home, like, share it with a friend over 60, and subscribe to Wise Aging Seniors. Because your future deserves space, light, and peace.